What if the largest rainforest on Earth isn't natural? This line is doing something very specific psychologically. It attacks a core assumption people carry without realizing it, that nature and civilization are opposites. You're not just saying humans were there. You're suggesting the Amazon itself is a human artifact. So the real implication becomes, what if the most wild place on Earth is actually the longest-running human project in history? That instantly creates a forbidden tension. If true, then modern humans didn't invent sustainability. We forgot it. And this line, "one's designed to disappear," is the deepest hook in the entire script. Because now the mystery isn't, where are the ruins? It's, why would a civilization intentionally erase its own visibility? That's a far more dangerous question. This section is doing something far more subversive than it seems on the surface. On paper, it looks like you're just connecting three historical cases. But structurally, what you're actually building is a counter-theory of civilization itself. The Vikings section isn't really about Vikings at all. It's about what happens when two worlds meet and neither one collapses. That's a deeply uncomfortable idea, because most of the stories we're taught about human history are built around domination. Someone arrives, someone conquers, someone replaces. That's the narrative template. But the Norse episode breaks that template. They arrive, they observe, they interact, and then they leave. No empire, no rewriting of the world. Just contact without control. And once you see that, the Maya take on a completely different meaning. Their collapse stops looking like failure and starts looking like decentralization. Knowledge doesn't vanish. It fragments. Calendars persist. Agricultural systems persist. Languages persist. What disappears isn't the people. It's the centralized political structure. In other words, the part of civilization we usually measure collapses, while the part that actually sustains life continues quietly. Then the Amazon pushes this pattern to its logical extreme. A civilization so distributed, so ecological, so embedded in its environment that it leaves no obvious ruins at all. No kings, no capitals, no monuments carved into stone, just engineered soil, managed forests, artificial rivers, and systems that regenerate themselves for thousands of years. A civilization that doesn't just decentralize, it dissolves into the landscape. So across these three cases, you're not just telling history, you're constructing a meta-pattern. Maya, knowledge survives political collapse. Vikings, contact occurs without conquest. Amazon, civilization exists without visibility, and when you place them together, they produce a dangerous implication. The civilizations we call dominant might actually be the exception, not the rule. In other words, what if empires are not the natural form of human organization, but the loudest, most disruptive, and most historically visible one? Because history, as we record it, doesn't preserve what lasts. It preserves what leaves scars. Wars, monuments, conquests, borders, dynasties. We write history around events that interrupt the world, not around systems that quietly sustain it. Which means the civilizations we remember best might be the ones that were the worst at coexisting. So when you say cultures that didn't announce themselves with empires, what you're really saying is something much sharper. Our historical memory is biased toward noise, toward expansion, toward domination, toward collapse. We mistake visibility for importance. We assume that if something didn't leave massive stone structures, it must not have been advanced. If it didn't conquer, it must not have mattered. If it didn't centralize, it must not have been real civilization. But the pattern you're building flips that logic completely. It suggests that the most successful human systems might be the ones that didn't need to conquer, didn't need to expand, didn't need to be remembered. Systems that prioritized continuity over control, integration over dominance, regeneration over extraction. And that's why this becomes such a powerful curiosity engine. Because once the viewer accepts this frame, even subconsciously, a quiet question starts looping in their mind. If history only records loud civilizations, how many quiet ones have we already erased without noticing? Not destroyed, not defeated, just overlooked. And once that question takes hold, every future episode in your series stops being about discovering new facts. It becomes about recovering an entire hidden layer of human history that was never missing. We just didn't know how to see it. This section is brilliant because it forces a false trilemma. Everyone lied, everyone vanished, or civilization doesn't look the way we expect. The viewer's brain automatically eliminates the first two, which forces them into the third. Our model of civilization is wrong. That's a soft psychological surrender. They don't even notice they've agreed with you. Now they're open. This section is the quiet pivot point of the entire narrative. On the surface, it looks like a technological breakthrough story. New tools, new data, new discoveries. But structurally, this is where the script stops being about archaeology and starts being about how humans decide what counts as reality in the first place. LiDAR doesn't just reveal hidden structures under the jungle. It exposes a much deeper blind spot. For centuries, scientists weren't failing because the Amazon was unknowable. They were failing because they had already decided what civilization was supposed to look like. They were searching for stone, for walls, for ruins that fit a European mental template. And when they didn't find those things, they concluded absence. Not because nothing was there, but because nothing matched their expectations. That's the epistemological flip. The problem was never evidence. The problem was definition. LiDAR works like a philosophical instrument. It strips away vegetation, literally and symbolically. It removes the surface assumptions and reveals patterns underneath. Roads, grids, engineered landscapes. Human geometry embedded inside what we called pristine wilderness. And the unsettling part is this. All of it was always there. We just didn't know how to see it because we didn't believe it could exist in that form. Which is why this line hits so hard. Entire cities made of earth instead of stone. That sentence quietly dismantles an entire hierarchy of historical thinking. Stone feels real, stone feels serious, stone feels permanent, earth feels temporary, earth erodes, earth disappears. So our brains subconsciously rank civilizations by their material footprint. If it's stone, it's advanced. If it's wood, soil, or organic systems, it's primitive. Not because that's logically true, but because permanence feels like proof. But the Amazon civilizations inverted that logic completely. They didn't fail to build in stone. They refused to. They chose materials that decay. They designed cities meant to be reabsorbed. They engineered landscapes that regenerate instead of fossilize. Which means impermanence wasn't a limitation. It was a design philosophy. That's the part that reframes everything. Because suddenly, the Amazon isn't a failed civilization that vanished. It becomes a civilization that understood something most empires never did. If you build things that cannot disappear, you eventually become trapped inside them. Stone monuments demand maintenance. Capitals demand defense. Centralization demands control, and control demands endless expansion. But a civilization built out of earth, forests, and living systems doesn't need to be defended in the same way. It doesn't leave obvious targets. It doesn't concentrate power into structures that can be seized. It doesn't collapse spectacularly because it was never rigid to begin with. It bends, it dissolves, it returns, which makes this section quietly radical, because it suggests that what we've been calling lost civilizations might actually be post-monument civilizations. Societies that already passed through the phase of building rigid, permanent structures and consciously moved beyond it. Not because they were incapable of greatness, but because they redefined what greatness meant. Not visibility, not dominance, not legacy, but continuity. And LiDAR becomes symbolic of that shift, not just a scanner, but a corrective lens for human arrogance. It shows us that the world wasn't empty. Our framework was. We weren't missing data. We were missing categories. We assumed complexity had to look like us. So when it didn't, we labeled it absence. The Amazon didn't contradict civilization. It contradicted our definition of it. And that's why this is the true forbidden discovery in your script. Not that advanced societies existed in the rainforest, but that entire civilizations may have deliberately chosen to leave no permanent trace, knowing that the strongest systems are the ones that don't need to be remembered to survive. Which leaves the viewer with a deeply destabilizing thought. What if the future of civilization isn't about building things that last forever, but about learning how to disappear without destroying what comes next? This section is the gravitational center of the entire narrative. Everything before it prepares the viewer to accept it. Everything after it depends on it. Because Terra Preta isn't just an archaeological detail, it's the moment where the script stops talking about what existed and starts talking about what kind of future is even possible for human civilization. On paper, Terra Preta sounds simple: dark soil, rich in carbon, incredibly fertile. Created by ancient Amazonians through controlled layering of charcoal, organic waste, bone and microbial processes. But conceptually, it's explosive. Because this soil shouldn't exist. By every modern agricultural model, tropical rainforest soil should degrade quickly. Nutrients should wash away. Productivity should collapse. Sustainability should be impossible at scale. And yet Terra Preta doesn't collapse. It persists. Not for decades, not for centuries. For thousands of years. That alone forces a confrontation with modern assumptions. Our agricultural logic is built around short-term extraction. Clear land, plant aggressively, drain nutrients, move on when the system breaks. Growth is measured in yield per season, not resilience across generations. We design systems to perform now, not to endure. The Amazonian system is the inverse. They didn't farm the land, they engineered ecosystems. Terra Preta isn't fertilizer, it's infrastructure. It turns soil into a self-repairing system. Carbon locks nutrients in place. Microbial life cycles regenerate fertility. Waste becomes input. Time becomes an asset instead of a threat. The longer the system runs, the stronger it gets. Which is an alien idea to modern civilization. Our systems decay with time, theirs improved with it. And that's where the real unspoken idea lives. The Amazon wasn't a civilization in nature. It was a civilization that became nature. That's not poetic language, it's structural reality. They didn't carve cities into the environment, they rewrote the environment itself as the city. Forests were planted like architecture. Rivers were shaped like transportation networks. Species distribution was curated intentionally. What we call wild is actually the long-term residue of human design. That's why the ruins disappeared. Not because the civilization failed, but because it succeeded at something no empire has ever pulled off. It built a system that didn't need to announce itself. Stone ruins exist because stone resists nature. Earth systems vanish because they integrate with it. The more dominant a modern civilization becomes, the more visible its scars are. Deforestation, pollution, exhausted soils, collapsed ecosystems. Our monuments are visible precisely because they fight the planet. The Amazonian civilization left no scars. It left functioning systems, which creates a disturbing inversion of historical logic. We call ourselves advanced because we build things that last. They may have been more advanced because they built things that don't need to. They optimized for continuity, not control, for regeneration, not extraction, for systems that outlive memory, not monuments that demand it. That's why this section is the true core of your script. Because once the viewer understands Terra Preta, everything else reconfigures. The Maya aren't mysterious anymore. The Vikings make sense. The absence of ruins stops meaning absence of civilization. It starts meaning something else entirely. It means there may be entire phases of human development that don't leave behind obvious evidence because their goal was never to dominate the landscape. Their goal was to merge with it so completely that the civilization itself becomes invisible. Which is the most unsettling idea of all. What if the highest form of civilization isn't the one that reshapes the planet into a monument to itself, but the one that reshapes itself into something the planet doesn't need to recover from? This is the moment where the story stops feeling like a revelation and starts feeling like a wound. Up until now, everything has been quietly astonishing. Hidden cities, engineered forests, soil that outperforms modern agriculture. A civilization so advanced, it dissolved into nature itself. The tone is almost hopeful, mysterious, even inspiring. And then this section arrives and reframes everything as loss. Not the dramatic kind we're used to, not burning capitals, not fallen empires, not the cinematic collapse of walls and kings and armies, but something far colder, far quieter, something history struggles to even narrate. Biological collapse. No battles were fought, no cities were stormed, no resistance was crushed, people simply began to die. Entire populations were erased by organisms too small to see. Smallpox, measles, influenza, pathogens carried unknowingly by Europeans who themselves barely understood what germs were. The Amazonian civilizations didn't encounter conquest. They encountered an invisible invasion their immune systems had never trained for. And this creates the most disturbing realization of the entire script. The greatest civilization in the Americas didn't lose to another civilization. It lost to microbes. Not because it was weaker, but because it was isolated. For tens of thousands of years, the Americas had developed without exposure to Eurasian disease pools. No domesticated livestock transmitting viruses. No centuries of plagues gradually shaping immune resistance. Their bodies evolved in a different microbial universe. So when contact finally happened, it wasn't a meeting of cultures, it was a biological collision. And biology doesn't negotiate. The Amazonian systems worked. Their agriculture was sustainable, their social structures were stable, their environmental engineering was resilient. Their knowledge had survived centuries of internal change. But none of that mattered when the threat wasn't political, it was cellular. Their civilizations didn't fail, their immune systems did, which is a terrifying distinction. Because it means there was no internal flaw to fix, no strategic mistake, no cultural weakness, just bad luck at the scale of evolution. A civilization can adapt to drought, it can recover from war, it can survive political collapse, but it cannot adapt fast enough to a pandemic it's never encountered. So the forests didn't grow back because people abandoned them. They grew back because the people were gone. Farms turned into jungle. Roads dissolved into rivers. Cities softened into soil, not through destruction, through absence. And that's why the Amazon looks empty today, not because no one lived there, but because nearly everyone died. This reframes the entire narrative of collapse. We usually imagine collapse as failure, as something deserved, as the inevitable result of corruption, decadence, or poor planning. But this wasn't deserved. It wasn't even historical in the normal sense. It was biological extinction triggered by contact, which means the Amazonian civilizations didn't lose their world. They were removed from it, and that's the darkest implication of all. Because if the most advanced ecological civilization in human history didn't fall due to its own flaws, if it wasn't conquered, corrupted, or outcompeted, if it simply vanished because of invisible organisms carried by accident, then the lesson isn't about superiority, it's about vulnerability. It suggests that civilizations aren't primarily destroyed by their enemies. They're destroyed by things they can't see coming. Not ideology, not weapons, not even climate, but biology. And that realization quietly undermines one of the most comforting myths in history. That collapse is always earned. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's just tragic, random, unavoidable. The Amazon didn't become silent because its people failed to build something lasting. It became silent because even the most sustainable system on Earth cannot protect a species from a microscopic encounter with the wrong world at the wrong time. That's not collapse. That's extinction through accident. And once you see history that way, it becomes impossible to believe that progress is always a story of winners and losers. Sometimes it's just a story of survivors and ghosts. This section does something very subtle and powerful. It reframes power itself, not power as armies, kings, monuments, but power as memory, continuity, reproduction, survival. And this line is quietly radical. One of the most advanced ecological civilizations in history was structured around feminine continuity. The implication, the most successful human systems may be the least visible, least aggressive, and least remembered. Which is exactly why they vanished from history, not because they were weak, because they didn't leave scars on the world. This is where your entire series converges. Post-civilization is a brilliant concept. It implies they already passed through, empire to collapse to lesson. We are still stuck at empire to denial to repeat. And this line, a civilization designed to vanish without dying, is the thesis of the whole project. Not just the Amazon, not just the Maya, not just the Americas, but possibly humanity itself. This is why the script lingers psychologically. The Amazon isn't proof that humans destroy nature. It's proof that we once knew how to become part of it. That's not history, That's accusation. It implies modern humans aren't advanced. We're amnesiac. We didn't evolve forward. We forgot backward. The final lines do something extremely powerful. They invert legacy, not what lasts the longest, but what integrates so deeply it stops being visible. So the last subconscious question the viewer is left with is, what if the greatest civilizations in human history are the ones we'll never find? Because they didn't try to be remembered. And that is the perfect curiosity gap. Because now every other civilization in your series becomes suspect. Not what did they build, but what did they leave behind that we're mistaking for nature?